The lovely village of Mayfield, a winding footpath, leads through lush and shady meadows to the base of the towering mountains. These majestic peaks overlook the valley below with their imposing and lofty presence. The land becomes increasingly untamed as the path goes higher, and the hiker has yet to go far before they start smelling the sweet scent of the grass and vigorous mountain plants. The path is steep and goes straight up to the mountain peaks. On a beautiful sunny morning in June, two friends were hiking up a narrow mountain path. One was a tall and strong girl, while the other was a child holding her hand. The child's cheeks were so red from the heat that you could see the crimson color through their sun-kissed skin, and it's no surprise that this child was dressed as if it were the coldest winter, even though it was a hot June day. She looked young, maybe around 5 years old, but it was hard to tell because she had multiple dresses on top of each other. She also had a thick red woolen shawl wrapped around her, making her look shapeless. She slowly and carefully walked up the hill in the hot weather with her tiny feet in sturdy mountain shoes. The two had walked quite a distance from the valley when they arrived at a little village called Dorfli. It was nestled halfway up the mountain. Here, the travelers were greeted with friendly hellos from every direction. People called out to them from windows, open doors, and outside as the older girl returned to her childhood home. But she didn't stop to answer her friends' excited greetings and questions. She kept walking until she reached the last house in the village. A voice called out to her from the door, saying, "Hey, wait a second, Henry. If you're going up higher, I'll come with you." The girl stopped in her tracks, and the child quickly released her hand and sat on the ground. "Are you feeling sleepy, Heidi?" asked her friend. "No, I'm hot," replied the child. "We're Elijah Host there. Just keep walking with confidence and take big steps. In just 1 more hour, we'll reach the top," Henry chirped, motivating the group. They were now accompanied by a friendly, cheerful woman who walked ahead with her old friend. The two immediately engaged in a lively conversation about everyone and everything in Dorfli and its surroundings, while the child followed behind them. "And where are you going with the child?" inquired the newcomer to the group. "I guess it's the little one your sister left behind?" "Yes," replied Henry. "I'm bringing her to Uncle's place where she'll be staying." "The child can stay up there with Elijah, Uncle." "You must be out of your mind, Henry. How could you even consider such a thing? The old man, though, will quickly send you and your idea back home. He can't do that because he's her grandfather. He needs to help her out. I've been taking care of the child until now, and let me tell you, Barble, I'm not going to pass up this opportunity to get a good job for her. It's the grandfather's turn to step up and do right by her." That would be all very well if he were like other people, said Stout Barbel passionately, but you know what he is. And what can he do with a child, especially with one so young? The child cannot possibly live with him. But where are you thinking of going yourself? To Frankfurt, where a really awesome place is waiting for me, replied Henry. The people I'm talking about were at the baths last summer, and it was my job to help them with their rooms. They wanted to take me with them back then, but I couldn't leave. Now they're there again, and they've asked me again, and I've made up my mind to go with them, so you can be sure of that. I'm so relieved I'm not the child, exclaimed Barbel, with a horrified look of sympathy. No one knows anything about the old man up there. He doesn't interact with anyone and never goes to church. When he does come down occasionally, everyone stays away from him and his big stick. Just seeing him, with his thick gray eyebrows and huge beard, is quite scary. He resembles an ancient heathen or Indian, and not many people would want to encounter him by themselves. Well, so what? Said Henry in a confident voice. He was the grandfather after all, and he had to take care of the child. He probably won't do anything bad to her, and if he does, he will be responsible for it, not me. I really want to know, Barbel said with curiosity, what the old man is hiding that makes him look so mysterious and live like a hermit up on the mountain, hardly ever showing himself. People say all sorts of things about him. Henry, you must have learned a lot about him from your sister, right? You're correct. I did hear something, but I won't say it again. If he finds out, I could get in trouble. Now Barbel had always been curious about Elijah Uncle. She couldn't understand why he disliked people so much and preferred to live alone. People would talk about him in hushed tones, as if they were afraid to say anything negative about him. But they also didn't want to support him. Furthermore, Barbel was puzzled as to why all the people in Dorfli referred to him as Elijah Uncle, since it seemed unlikely that he could be an uncle to everyone in the village. Like everyone else, she followed the tradition and called the older man Uncle. Barbel had recently moved to Dorfli after getting married. Before that, her home was in Prattigau, so she needed to become more familiar with everything that happened and all the people who lived in Dorfli and its surroundings. On the other hand, Daniel was born in Dorfli and lived there with her mother until her mother passed away the previous year. After that, she moved to the baths at Ragatz and started working as a chambermaid in a big hotel. That morning she had traveled from Ragatz with the child. A friend had kindly given them a ride in a hay cart up to Mayenfeld. Barbel was excited and didn't want to miss out on this chance to satisfy her curiosity. She linked her arm with Henry's secretively and asked, I trust you to reveal the facts to me and explain the meaning behind all these rumors about him. I think you have all the details. Please enlighten me on what ails the old man and whether he has always been avoided like he is now, and if he has always been so grumpy. It's hard for me to say if he was always the same, since I'm only 26 and he's at least 70 years old. So, I don't know much about his youth, but if I could be certain that what I tell you won't spread throughout Radigan, I could share all sorts of stories about him. My mother and he both came from Domleschg. No way, Henry. What are you talking about? Barbel replied, a little upset. People in Radigan don't gossip that much, and I know when to keep quiet when I need to. All right then, I'll tell you. But hold on a second, said Henry in a cautious tone, and she glanced behind her to check if the child was too far away to hear what she was about to say. However, the child was nowhere in sight and must have wandered off from the group earlier while they were too engrossed in their conversation to notice. Henry stood perfectly still and gazed around her, taking in every direction. The footpath meandered back and forth, but could still be seen by Dorfley. However, no one could be seen on it now. "I know where she is!" exclaimed Barbel excitedly. "Look over there." She pointed to a spot far away from the footpath. "Look, she's climbing up the hill over there with the goatherd and his goats. I'm curious why he's taking so long to bring them up today. But it actually works out well for us, because now he can keep an eye on the child, and you can tell me your story more easily. Well, when it comes to taking care of things," said Henry, "the boy doesn't have to worry about that. The little girl is actually quite smart for her age of 5, and she knows how to pay attention. She observes everything that's happening, as I've noticed many times before. This will be helpful for her in the future, because the old man doesn't have much besides his 2 goats and his hut." "Did he ever have any more?" asked Barbel. "He? I should think so indeed," replied Henry with animation. "He was owner once of one of the largest farms in Domleschg. He was the elder of 2 brothers. The younger was a quiet, orderly man, but nothing would please the other but to play the grand gentleman and go driving about the country and mixing with bad company, strangers that nobody knew. He drank and gambled away the whole of his property, and when this became known to his mother and father, they died, one shortly after the other, of sorrow. The younger brother, who was also reduced to beggary, went off in his anger, no one knew whither, while uncle himself, having nothing now left to him but his bad name, also disappeared. For some time his whereabouts were unknown. Then someone found out that he had gone to Naples as a soldier. After that, nothing more was heard of him for 12 or 15 years. At the end of that time he reappeared in Domleschg, bringing with him a young child, whom he tried to place with some of his kinspeople. Every door, however, was shut in his face, for no one wished to have any more to do with him. Embittered by this treatment, he vowed never to set foot in Domleschg again, and he then came to Dorfli, where he continued to live with his little boy. His wife was probably a native of the Grisons, whom he had met down there, and who died soon after their marriage. He could not have been entirely without money, for he apprenticed his son, Tobias, to a carpenter. He was a steady lad, and kindly received by everyone in Dorfli. The old man was, however, still looked upon with suspicion, and it was even rumored that he had been forced to make his escape from Naples, or it might have gone badly with him, for that he had killed a man, not in fair fight, you understand, but in some brawl. We, however, did not refuse to acknowledge our relationship with him, my great-grandmother on my mother's side having been sister to his grandmother. So we called him uncle, and as through my father we are also related to nearly every family in Dorfli, he became known all over the place as Uncle, and since he went to live on the mountainside, he has gone everywhere by the name of Elijah Uncle. And what happened to Tobias? Asked Barbel, listening with great curiosity. Hold on a second. I'll get to that. But I can't spill all the beans right away, responded Daniel. Tobias was taught his trade in meals, and when he had served his apprenticeship, he came back to Dorfli and married my sister Adelaide. They had always been fond of one another, and they got on very well together after they were married. But their happiness did not last long. Her husband met with his death only 2 years after their marriage, a beam falling upon him as he was working and killing him on the spot. They carried him home, and when Adelaide saw the poor disfigured body of her husband, she was so overcome with horror and grief that she fell into a fever from which she never recovered. She had always been rather delicate and subject to curious attacks, during which no one knew whether she was awake or sleeping. And so 2 months after Tobias had been carried to the grave, his wife followed him. Their sad fate was the talk of everybody far and near, and both in private and public, the general opinion was expressed that it was a punishment which Uncle had deserved for the godless life he had led. Some went so far even as to tell him so to his face. Our minister endeavored to awaken his conscience and exhorted him to repentance. But the old man grew only more wrathful and obdurate and would not speak to a soul. And everyone did their best to keep out of his way. All at once we heard that he had gone to live up the Elijah and did not intend ever to come down again. And since then, he has led his solitary life on the mountainside at enmity with God and man. Mother and I took Adelaide's little one, then only a year old, into our care. When Mother died last year, and I went down to the baths to earn some money, I paid old Ursel, who lives in the village just above, to keep and look after the child. I stayed on at the baths through the winter, for as I could sew and knit, I had no difficulty in finding plenty of work. And early in the spring, the same family I had waited on before returned from Frankfurt, and again asked me to go back with them. And so we leave the day after tomorrow, and I can assure you it is an excellent place for me. And you're going to give the child to the old man up there? It surprises me that you would even consider doing that, Henry, said Barbel, disappointed. What do you mean? Replied Henry. I've taken care of the child, but what should I do with it now? I can't possibly bring a 5-year-old child with me to Frankfurt. By the way, where are you headed, Barbel? We're already halfway up the Elijah. We finally made it to the place I wanted, replied Barbel. I wanted to talk to the goatherd's wife, who helps me with spinning during the winter. So farewell, Henry, and best of luck to you. Daniel greeted her friend with a friendly handshake and stood still as Barbel approached a cozy little hut. The hut was a lovely shade of dark brown and nestled in a hollow, providing shelter from the chilly mountain breeze. The hut was located halfway up the Elijah, counting from Dorfli. It was fortunate that it had some refuge, because it was in such a poor condition that it would not have been safe to live in. When the solid south wind blew over the mountain, everything inside the hut, including the doors and windows, shook and rattled, and the old beams creaked and trembled. On days like this, if the goatherd's house were up on the mountain, it would have been blown down the valley without warning. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Peter. He was 11 years old and had an essential job. He would go down to Dorfli every morning to bring his goats back up to the mountain. The mountain was a magical place where the goats could eat all the yummy plants they wanted until evening came. Then Peter, with his playful animals, would happily bound down the mountain once more until he reached Dorfli. There, he would let out a cheerful whistle through his fingers, and all the owners of the goats would come out to bring their animals back home. The little boys and girls happily ran towards Peter when he whistled. They weren't scared of the friendly goats. This was the only time Peter could spend with his young friends during the summer. The rest of his day was spent alone with the goats. He had a mother and a blind grandmother at home, but he had to leave early in the morning and didn't return until late in the evening from Dorfli. He loved spending time with the other children, so he would stay as long as he could, playing and chatting. This meant he only had enough time at home to eat his bread and milk in the morning, quickly, and then again in the evening before bed. His father, also known as the goatherd, used to make a living by caring for goats when he was younger. Unfortunately, he had a tragic accident while cutting wood a few years ago. His mother, Brigitte, was always known as the goatherd's wife due to their long-standing connection. The blind grandmother was referred to as grandmother by everyone in the neighborhood, regardless of age. Henry had been standing for a while, searching around her for any sign of the children and the goats, but she couldn't see them anywhere, so she decided to climb higher, hoping to get a better look at the mountain and the valley below. She carefully examined the slopes around her with a worried expression and growing unease. Meanwhile, the children were taking a long and winding path, as Peter knew many places where delicious food, like shrubs and plants, grew for his goats. He always liked to lead his flock away from the usual path. The young girl, tired from the hot weather and the heavy clothes she wore, tried her best to keep up with him, but it wasn't easy. She didn't say a word, but her small eyes stayed fixed on Peter as he jumped around effortlessly on his bare feet, wearing nothing but his short breeches. She watched the agile goats as they bounded over rocks and bushes, effortlessly scaling steep slopes. Suddenly, she plopped down on the ground and quickly started taking off her shoes and socks with tiny fingers. After finishing her task, she stood up, took off the warm red shawl, and tossed it aside. Then she began to unfasten her dress. In no time at all, the second one was also undone. You see, Henry cleverly layered the Sunday dress on top of the everyday one to make things easier. In a flash, the regular dress hurried after the other one, and now the child stood up, wearing only her light, short-sleeved undergarment. She happily stretched out her little bare arms. She gathered all her clothes into a neat pile, and then joyfully followed Peter and the goats, effortlessly jumping and climbing like the rest of the group. Peter ignored what the child was doing when she stayed behind. But when she ran to him in her new clothes, his face lit up with a big smile. His grin grew even wider when he saw the pile of clothes on the ground. His mouth stretched Elijah's from ear to ear, but he said nothing. Now, free to move around comfortably, the young girl started chatting with Peter. He had a lot of questions to answer, because she was curious about how many goats he owned, where he was taking them, and what he had to do once they reached their destination. Finally, after a little while, they and the goats reached the hut and saw Cousin Henry. As soon as the woman saw the children approaching her, she exclaimed, "Oh my, Heidi, what happened to you? You look quite messy. And where are your dresses, the red shawl, the new shoes, and the stockings I made for you? Everything is gone. There's nothing left." "What were you thinking, Heidi? Where are all your clothes?" The little one softly pointed to a spot below the mountainside and replied, "Over there." Henry looked in the direction indicated. She could barely make out something resting on the ground, with a red spot on top that she was sure was the woolen blanket. "You silly little thing!" exclaimed Henry with frustration. "Why would you do something like that? What made you take off your clothes? What were you thinking?" "I don't want any clothes," said the child, without a hint of remorse for what she had done. "Oh dear, you silly child, don't you have any common sense?" Daniel continued, scolding and expressing her frustration. "Who is going all that way down to get them? It's quite a long walk. Peter, could you please go and get them for me as fast as you can? And please don't just stand there staring at me as if you were stuck to the ground." "I am already past my time," replied Peter Elijahly, without budging from the spot where he had been standing, hands in his pockets, listening to Henry's outburst of dismay and anger. "Well, you won't get very far if you just keep standing there with your eyes wide open," Henry replied sternly. "But look, I have something special for you." She then extended a shiny new coin that glistened in the sunlight. Peter was so quick that he dashed down the steep mountainside, taking the fastest route. He reached the pile of clothes in no time, scooped them up, and hurried back. Henry couldn't help but praise him as she handed over the promised money. Peter quickly put it in his pocket, and his face lit up with joy, because it wasn't often that he had such valuable treasures. "Hey, could you help me carry these things up to Uncle's place?" "It's on your way," said Henry cheerfully, getting ready to climb up the steep mountain slope behind the goatherd's hut. Peter happily agreed to do this and followed after her on his bare feet, with his left arm around the bundle and the right swinging his goatherd stick, while Heidi and the goats went skipping and jumping joyfully beside him. After a fun and adventurous climb that took them a little over 3/4 of an hour, they finally reached the top of the Elijah Mountain. Uncle's hut was perched on a rocky ledge, where it caught the gentle breeze and basked in the warm sunlight. From there, you could see a beautiful view of the valley below. Next to the hut were 3 tall fir trees with long, thick branches that had yet to be trimmed. Farther ahead, there stood another wall of mountains. The lower slopes were adorned with lovely grass and plants, while the higher slopes were rockier and covered in scrub. These slopes gradually led up to the steep, barren, rocky peaks. Next to the hut, facing the beautiful valley, Uncle had set up a cozy seat. Here he was sitting, with his pipe in his mouth and his hands on his knees, peacefully gazing out, when suddenly the children, the goats, and Cousin Henry came into sight. Heidi reached the top first. She walked confidently up to the elderly man, extended her hand, and cheerfully greeted him. "Good evening, grandfather." Excuse me, what's going on here?" he asked sternly, as he quickly shook the child's hand and stared at her intently with his thick eyebrows furrowed. Heidi couldn't help but stare at the grandfather. His long beard and thick gray eyebrows that grew together over his nose made him look like a bush. He was such a remarkable sight that Heidi couldn't look away. Meanwhile, Henry had come up with Peter, following closely behind. Peter stopped for a moment to observe the scene unfolding before him. "Hello, Uncle," greeted Henry cheerfully as she approached him. "Guess what? I've brought Tobias and Adelaide's little one with me. You probably won't recognize her, since you haven't seen her since she was just a year old." "And why would the child be interested in what I'm doing up here?" the old man inquired with a touch of impatience. "Hey there," he then called out to Peter. "Hurry up and go with your goats. You're already running late, and take mine with you." Peter immediately followed the old man's command and swiftly vanished. The stern look he received made him eager to leave without delay. "The child is here to stay with you," Henry replied. "I have, I think, done my duty by her for these 4 years, and now it's your turn to do yours." "That's all there is, huh?" exclaimed the elderly man, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he gazed at her. "And when the child starts to get upset and complain at you, as is typical with these irrational little creatures, what should I do with her then?" "That's your business," replied Henry. "I remember taking care of her when she was just a baby, even though it was already a lot of work for my mom and me. Now I have to go and focus on making money, and you're the closest relative to the child. If you can't find a way to take care of her, you can do whatever you want with her. Just remember, if anything bad happens to her, you'll be responsible for it. But I'm sure you don't want to add to the guilt you already feel." Now Henry was feeling a bit uneasy about what she was doing, which made her feel hot and bothered. As a result, she ended up saying more than she had meant to. As she said her final words, Uncle stood up from his chair. He stared at her, making her take a few steps back. Then, forcefully, he ordered her, "Go away right now and return to where you came from as fast as you can. I don't want to see you around here again anytime soon." Henry didn't hesitate for a second. "Goodbye to you then, and to you too, Heidi," she cheerfully called as she quickly turned away and started to descend the mountain at a running pace. She didn't slow down until she found herself safely back at Dorfley. It felt like a lot was happening inside her, like a powerful engine propelling her forward. Once again, people bombarded her with questions from all directions. Everyone was familiar with Henry and knew all about the child's birth and past. They were all curious about what she had done with the child. People asked from every door and window, "Where is the child? Where did you leave the child, Henry?" And with growing reluctance, Henry replied, Up there with Elijah Uncle. I've already told you the child is with Elijah Uncle.
Claro.
Then the women started scolding her, one after another. One exclaimed, "Why would you do such a thing?" And another said, "Just imagine leaving a helpless little thing up there." While over and over again they repeated, "The poor little one, the poor little one," following her as she walked away. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Henry ran forward as fast as she could until she was out of earshot. She wasn't pleased about what she had done because the child had been left in her care by her dying mother. She sallied down, though, thinking she could help the child more if she had lots of money. Knowing that she would soon be far away from all these people making such a big deal about things was a relief. She was even happier that she could now take such a good job.
Don't forget to like and done in the comment.